All right, so today we're looking at the gradient in terms of our straight line. So as I said the other day, we've been looking at straight lines. So when we graph things and they've got like a straight line, that's another word for straight in maths is called linear. So you might hear them talk about linear. Now, how steep this line is, so say I could have a line like that. I'm a bit delayed. Yep, that blue line is like not as steep as the green line. So the steepness and all that and how it goes up and down is called the gradient. Or sometimes, so they call it, they'll call it the slope. So the gradient. Now, you know how we've been looking at like rules or things for our straight line. So say we've got our straight line and we have a rule, and obviously we've said this is y and this is x. So our rule always has this format where it's y equals something times x, so that m is a number, and then we might sometimes say plus another number. So this number that's in front of x is actually called the gradient, and so we just represent it with an m when we're just talking about it. But say for example, you'll see a number in the equation. So later on we might see y equals 3x plus 1. This number here is our gradient. Okay, so that would be the m. So that's the gradient. All right, so the gradient, we have a few rules, and our first rule we could use is where we say, to work it out, if we've got a graph, is we say rise over run. So if you have a look at this diagram here, what we're saying is say the car started here and then it ended here. So if you look at just on how, if it was going up, say that was a y-axis and that was the x-axis, if from this point, how far up did it go? So it went 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's where they're saying a rise of 4. And then how far across? It went over this way, 1, 2, 3, 4. So they've said a run of 4. So when they're working out the gradient, that's why they've said the rise is 4 over 4. So it's 1. So if we were writing the rule for this equation, it'd be 1x, like that. So there, this number is the gradient. All right. So that's how we do it. Now, if we look at, I think I've just repeated, what's this? This has just been written twice. All right, so if we have a negative gradient, so what we're going to do, I'm going to change it. So say it went like this. So we started here and we ended here, okay? If you do, when we're looking at, don't worry about this one. I'm going to pretend it's downwards. So if we know that the gradient is rise over run, if we go from our start point, because we actually go down ways, so we're going towards the negative, we're going towards negative y, that would we actually say it's a rise of -4 because we've gone down towards it. Now with the x, or the run bit, we still went in the positive direction, so it's still 4. So then this run's gradient would be negative. So when you have a gradient that's sloping from the left to right, going back down that way, that's a negative gradient. And so if we were writing the equation for this one, it'd be y equals, it would have a -1 in front of the x. Okay, so the gradient. All right, so let's have a look. So now we know that we've got this rule, rise over run. So what we're going to do is we're going to practice finding the gradients of these lines. So if I start at this point and I'm going to say I end at this point, all right, so I know that the gradient is rise over run, so let's look at the rise. So I went actually from, this is 0, and over here, so which one of these numbers is the x and which one's the y? Someone tell me. X equals what at this point?
15.
Yeah, this is the x and this is the y. Good. So if I've gone down to this point, I'm actually down at -5. So my rise was -5. Now I've gone across from x is 0 across to x is 15. So I've got a run of 15. Okay, so we can simplify that because we know that 5 goes into 5 once and 5 goes into 15 3 times. So we can say the gradient is -1/3. So that's the gradient. All right, so let's have a go at doing these ones over here. So you just have to pick 2 points that the line's going through. So it's easy to obviously start at 0, 0 if you can. And we'll do that. So we'll go M is rise over run. We'll write our rule. And let's go. So we go from, let's do the rise. So on the Y, we go from being at 0 up to what? What would this number be? Who can tell me? That's X, that's Y. Over here, what's that in line with? 4, good. So my rise went from 0 to 4. So that's 4. And where did my run? I've gone from this X is 0 over to this X. So what would that be? How far have I run across?
2.
2, awesome. So we can simplify 4 over 2. That's actually equals a whole number, so 2. So we know the gradient here is 2. Now with this one, if we look at it, gradient is rise over run. If you look at the points, we're always at 3, y equals 3. So this is 3. Over here, y would still be 3. So it's actually 0 gradient. So when you have a line like this, like a flat one, horizontal, you actually, because there's no rise, 0. And even if we picked it, doesn't matter if we had a run of 3 or whatever, 2, whatever, doesn't matter. It will always still end up being 0. All right, so we might need to write a little note that a horizontal line equals 0 gradient. So M equals 0. Oops, sorry. Okay, so this is a horizontal line, 0 gradient. All right. Just while we're doing that, when you have a vertical line, like here, so when we have a vertical line, the gradient is called undefined. Is actually, we don't say it is anything, we say it's undefined. Okay, so just need to know that. So if you ask what the gradient of that line is, you say undefined. Okay, and lastly, let's go practice this one. I'm just going to pretend my start point is here. As long as I start on one point on the line, and then I'll just say it ends there. Because I'm going to use the start because I know that's 0, 0. So I know when I've gone, so M equals rise over run. Now my rise, I actually went down by -5 and I went over a run of 15. So this one, oh, it's the same as this one up here, sorry, is -1/3. All right, let's keep going. All right, so rise over run is one way to do the formula or to find the gradient. And the other formula, which I reckon is probably the easier and the best way to use it, and you can do it every time, is to use this. So remember that, so if you have, you're going to get given, if you can find 2 points on the line. So if you have 2 points on the line, so we're going to call it, say, point 1 and point 2. So point 1, we'll call it x1. It'll have an x value and it'll have a y1, a y value. And 0.2, we'll call it x2 value and the y2 value. Okay, so this is what that formula is talking about. So over here, if I call this I'm going to call this 0.1. This is 0.1. So this will be x1 and y1. And I'll call this that's 0.2. So I'll call this one x2 and y2. Okay, so if I go to use this formula, m equals y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1, what I'm going to do is just substitute in. So my y2 is here. It's 8. So I'll put 8 in there. Now minus my y1, which is 2. So 2 over, now I'm looking for x2, which is 3, minus x1, which is 1. So then you just simply do that calculation. So 8 minus 2 is 6, and 3 minus 1 is 2. And if you can simplify that, which we can just write, m equals 3, because 6 divided by 2 is 3. So that's that one. So over here, I'll go again. I'm just going to call this x1, y1. I'll call this x2, y2. It doesn't matter which point you call 0.1 and 0.2, you'd still get the same answer. Okay, just as long as if you're going to call this guy x1, this has to be y1. Okay? All right, so when we go to work it out, we're going to write our formula to make sure so the examiner can see that you know the formula. So y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So it would equal, we go do it, it would, y2 is negative 1 minus y1, which is 4, over x2, which is 5, minus x1, which is minus 3. So what if I've got minus 1, minus 4, I get minus 5. But what happens here, boys, when you have a minus and a minus? Do anyone remember? What happens?
It's a positive.
Yeah, good. Yeah, this changes to a positive when you've got two negative, when you're minusing a minus. So that ends up being 8. So negative 5 over 8 is the gradient. And you can just leave it like that. Now, just to show you that it still would be the same if I did rise over run. And I'll show you why. Because if you look, if I start here, okay, and I'm going from 4 all the way down to negative 1, that would mean I went down 5 units, didn't I? Because all the 4 plus the 1. So I've gone down 5 units. And then if I'm sitting at negative 3 and I go all the way over to 5, that means there would be 3 units there and another 5 units there, which would mean 8. So see how I got the same? So you would get the same, but I often find using this a bit better, a bit easier to do.